What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Mishmash Podcast. Today, my guest is father, husband, outdoorsman, Russ Sommers. My buddy Russ. Russ, dude, thanks so much for making this happen.
For sure. Thanks for having me.
I'm not going to lie. I was a little surprised that you opted for those three titles because I was actually going to go with rogue poet, human silverback hybrid, as we discussed, and Mr. Belvedere superfan. But, I mean, I guess those are probably a little more accurate.
Look, I answered to lots of things, all right? Just, whatever makes sense, whatever makes you happy.
That works.
So, I try to think about the things that are most important to me, right? And I was given some thought to all right, how would I want to be introduced? To me, father's number one, right? It's the most important job I have. It's the best job I have. It's also the most thankless job I have.
At times, right?
Yeah. You have to just infer the appreciation, right? I think is where it comes from. But I mean, I think it really speaks to priorities, right? And looking at your life and saying, hey, this is now I've created humans, right? Now I have a responsibility to set them up for success and give them what they need to set them up and achieve more than I have, right? So I mean, that's priority one is make sure that they understand things that I didn't understand at their age, make sure that they have access to things that I didn't have, and make sure that they stay grounded, right? And stay humble and not take things for granted, right? So try to impart all the mistakes that I made, all the things that I've learned from those, try to help them learn from those mistakes so that way that becomes their floor.
Right. Because that's just it. I like that you're looking at it from the floor perspective instead of the ceiling, right? Because obviously in terms of potential and everything, that's just a different level. But where they're starting out with, I think raises the ceiling too, right? Like in terms of their head start being better prepared for life because of learning from your mistakes or just your life experience, I think it just propels them to succeed that much more.
Yeah, it's also setting an example. Look, the second thing I said was husband, right? I have a great relationship with my wife. She's fantastic. She literally is the driving force behind most of the things that I do. I mean, I wouldn't be in the position that I am today without her. And using that relationship as an example of, setting expectations on how they should expect to be treated, how to engage with one another, how to communicate, how to take feedback, how to, shut up and listen, right? How to do all those things. Pretty important.
Well, listening, I think, is probably the most important one that you mentioned. And it's something I think enough people don't do, unfortunately, at least not in the general discourse, right? Like it's pretty frustrating to see the state of things now. We've kind of touched on this at various points in our conversations, but it's a lot of yelling and not enough listening, not enough self-reflection, not enough ownership. And I kind of think that's sort of the thrust of what I wanted to get to in our conversation for tonight. I know we're going to look more at parenting because this is the second episode in sort of a string of parent-centric parental episodes. And it's not about, in the previous episode, there was a lot of discourse that we had about not so much parenting techniques, but just what we feel works for us. It's not meant to be judgmental. It's not meant to be, dunking on anybody else and their habits. But I think we can both agree that in terms of the state of society, even locally, there's some wiggle room for improvement, I think, in terms of how people parent their kids and how, or if they're even preparing them for adulthood. Any thoughts on that?
I've had this conversation a few different times, a few different ways, but general theme's kind of the same, right? And I think there's a lot of folks that view parenting as this chore, right? That they have to do this thing, right? I think for me, it's changing the perspective from I have to be this, I have to be dad, I have to do these things to I get to do these things, right? I think that to me is a big shift. The ability to look at things that maybe aren't as fun all the time, right? And say, look, I'm fortunate enough, I have to make dinner for my family. No, I'm fortunate enough that I get to have dinner with my family, right? Those little shifts change the way that you view parenting, right? And I mean, I talked about it with my jiu-jitsu instructor. He is an incredible dad. You see the way he interacts with his son. I take things from what he does, and we've had conversations how could someone not love this. Like that, it's the coolest thing ever. You've created a person, right? And you've watched them go and grow and learn things and experience struggles, right? Which may seem inconsequential to us, but in their lives and their perspective are just catastrophic, right? And you're like, hey, let me help you provide some context to this, right? Let me help you work through it, but not give them the solution, and let them kind of work their way through and learn some skills that they can adopt and use when you're not there, right? Like, it just, I don't know why somebody wouldn't embrace doing it. So I don't know. I struggle to relate to those people.
I agree completely. And to me, I feel like we should have like a bingo card for certain words here, like the buzzwords, because perspective, I saw in your notes, right? Perspective versus perception. Those are two obviously different topics that we could go into, but I think perspective is something that a lot of people lack. And I think that it comes back to this almost laziness of the mind. Like, people are almost anesthetized by just technology and everything that we have. There's not enough thought and thinking. Like, I would imagine that you and I are both, similar in terms of like being reflective. And I don't want to say just being appreciative. That's sort of like trite. But what I mean is, in instances, especially for me, if I hear about, we had a tragedy here in Hazlitt a couple of years ago, or maybe even just a year ago at this point, right? Of unfortunately a family that passed away, or part of a family that passed away. In those moments, I think it's easy for a lot of people to take stock of what they have and maybe find a little bit more appreciation for it. But it shouldn't be those instances, right? It should be something that you do every day. Like you said, whether it's being grateful for an opportunity to have dinner with your family, And I think the more people put effort into doing those types of things more regularly, I think we'd see an improvement in a lot of different areas of society.
Yeah, I was at an event last night where I was fortunate enough to be a speaker and was trying to impart some wisdom to younger college kids that were in the business school honor society at my alma mater, which was fantastic. And one of the things that I shared with them is, my view is happiness is a choice, right? Also, unhappiness is a choice, right? I think people tend to think like, oh, I'm unlucky, I'm this, I'm that. And I hate to get into the manifest destiny thing, right? But the whole he who says he can and he who says he can't are both usually right. Well, guess what? The same way that you view your life, if you think that you're unlucky, or you think that you're unhappy, or you think that you're disillusioned or disadvantaged or whatever, you're probably correct. I mean, I was watching a video, I've seen it a couple times, but the one that they did this study where they brought these women in and they put prosthetic scars on their faces. And then they had to have them go in an interview. And right before they went in, they did some touch-ups. And what they did was remove the scarring. And then they went in an interview, but they didn't get a chance to see their face with the scarring removed. When they got done interviewing, they had asked them, hey, did you feel like you were targeted because of this or discriminated against? And the overwhelming overwhelming percentage out of that group said yes. They felt like there were specific comments that targeted their scarring. There were specific conversations. They felt like they were discriminated against because of it. And none of it existed because they had already removed it before they went in.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, I really believe that there is this component that, if you look for these things, you'll find them, right? So I used the example last night of the red car theory. If I asked you, if you took an hour drive when you got to where you're going, how many red cars did you see? And you'd say, I'm sure I saw at least one, but I couldn't tell you how many. But if I said, hey, on your way home, for every red car you see, I'll give you $20. I can guarantee you'll tell me exactly how many red cars you'll see.
Right.
That's how happiness works. It's really simple, right? If you look for reasons to be happy, they're there for you to find them. If you look for reasons to be unhappy, absolutely you'll find them.
100%. And this sort of touches upon an angle of this discussion that we had at the gym recently, where I don't know when it comes to social media that people are actively seeking happiness or unhappiness. I think what happens is they default to a desire for things that they don't have, right? So it's more lazy enviness than anything else, right? Like, they see these other people, they see these, really manufactured but well manicured lives, and they want what that person has without ever really considering what that person did to earn it. What else might be going on? Like, are they're getting just one slice of the pie there, and I think I don't know. And maybe it's just painting with too broad of a brush, but I feel like a lot of people do that. I think that's kind of like the insidiousness of social media.
Well, and I think it's even more dangerous than that, because it's not just looking at an individual person and saying, okay, well, this is what this person has, and taking, just the best parts of their life that they're showing you. They're polling their friends. They're looking at the 5, 7, 10 people that are around them and taking the best parts of each one and building this life that no one has, and then holding themselves to that standard, saying, well, why don't I have that person's house and that person's car and, that person's spouse and that person's physique and whatever. And it's like, well, none of them do, right? There's things that people are good at, right? Like, you take it sports, right? Some people are good at running. Some people are good at basketball. Some people are good at football. Some people are good at hockey. Some people are good at grappling and jiu-jitsu, right? You find me somebody who's good at all of those things.
Right.
Right? It just, like, those things don't exist. You're holding yourself to a false standard. And I'll double down on that, because I met recently, let's just say this person is a top 10 athlete in their sport, like world-renowned, very well-known name, young person, sat down with this person. She filmed an Instagram video, and she was sharing this with our group as part of her talk. 45-second Instagram video. It took 13 hours. There was a script, there was a director, an executive producer, a film crew, a sound crew,
Oh, wow.
props, background, lighting, this, that, for a 45-second Instagram clip. There were 20 people involved, and it took a 12-hour workday to get it done.
That's unbelievable.
For 45 seconds. So if you open up your phone and you're like, oh, look at this. It didn't happen that way.
Right, and for it to look natural too, right?
Right.
I'm sure. No, it's frustrating because people seem averse to failure, right? They look at it as just this thing to be avoided. And, you said about people being good at this sport or good at that sport. For me, my mindset is there's always going to be somebody better. It doesn't matter how good you are. And at least for me, in my experience with sports, I was always chasing those people. It wasn't about being better than anybody. It was more about like the mountains, right? Like, all right, so if I got past this person, if I was somehow now better than this player, well, then I looked to the next one, and I just kept going from there, because it's about bettering myself. It's not about just these ephemeral ideas of greatness or whatever it is. And I just feel like so many parents are petrified of their kids being viewed as less than or something. Like in I don't know if it's necessarily just locally, but like there's this trend where kids start out in a sport, any sport, at the rec level, right? Usually a parent coach, they build a team, it's fun, everything's good, but now it has to be competitive. Now there's got to be something more to it than, just recreation and fun. So they become a travel team. But the problem is, if they get to a point where some of the kids aren't really actually competitively good enough to make a team through tryouts and stuff, they'll pull the entire team out and go to these places, whether it's soccer, basketball, football, maybe not football, but baseball, and just make a club team. And now, they have the illusion of being something that they're not. And it's artifice, and it kills me, because like you're robbing your kids of these opportunities. Go out for a tryout and fail. Don't make a team. Use that as an opportunity to have all these life experiences that they're going to have anyway. Like, I'm petrified that these kids aren't going to experience failure until they're adults. Like, it blows my mind. How can that be? And maybe, I don't know what your work situation is like in terms of like much, much younger, employees and whatnot, but it really does seem like there's this just philosophical shift that I can't relate to,
Yeah, I'm not big on the everybody gets a trophy either, right? Like, and finding ways, like, I'm all about making sure people have an opportunity to play and participate, right? And that people are supportive. But creating these artificial, elite level things where it doesn't really exist, and you're creating a construct around them to build people up so high, and at what cost? I mean, parenting now, right? When we were kids, granted, right? We grew up right across the highway in Union Beach. But like, I got a baseball glove, right? We'd pick up balls from around the baseball thing. Like every couple of years, somebody would get a baseball bat, like, and that was the cool thing. And now you see these kids going. Everyone's got the 2 pairs of cleats, 3 bats, 2 gloves, 2 outfits. They're a member of 3 different teams, and you're like, we just didn't have those means when we were that age, like, and no one did, right? So I think we've we've bastardized childhood to the point where everyone has to be this super special, unique person as opposed to being part of a collective. And it's like, you're part of a team. Like, win as a team. Like, at that age, well-conditioned athletes who know how to play together will absolutely starch a team full of kids who went to this big name camp and that big name camp who aren't as well-conditioned and don't know how to play team sports.
Right.
But, the parents who sent the kid to all those camps have spent tens of thousands of dollars to make their kid the best player they are. And the scary part is some of these people are doing it in hopes that they get scholarships to college through sports. Well, look, I'm not going to go through the accounting of it all, but if you're spending $10,000 a year per kid to go through these sports over the course of a 12-year adolescence, right, from 6 to 18, right, that's $120,000 that you've spent for the kid to hopefully earn a college scholarship. I mean, I don't know what community college for 2 years and then state school costs for 2 years, but I'm pretty sure it costs less than $120,000 in today's fees. Right. And then the kid can go and play the sports and have fun doing it and enjoy themselves. And if that's a passion they want to stick with, and they do go to high school and they do go to college and play it, awesome. But you haven't stolen their childhood.
Right. And it's interesting, right, from a socioeconomic standpoint, where I feel like a lot of people, obviously I didn't grow up in Union Beach, but I grew up in Garrettson Beach in Brooklyn, very similar place, similar, backgrounds, some white collar workers, but mostly blue collar town, a lot of hardworking people. I would say middle class, but where nobody really wanted, you know what I mean? Everybody, so for me, I had friends who would go to Disney every year and they would fly down, but I had just as many friends who were like us, where it was, road trips somewhat locally, just for expenses and whatnot. Whereas now it's absurd. And it's just, I think it's a natural consequence of just how society has progressed and whatnot in terms of the area, right? The point being that the means that everyone now has access to, it's not commensurate with the workload that should have gone with it. So for example, for me growing up, when I wanted a TV in my room, my parents said, sure, go start saving up for it, get an allowance. When I was older, especially once I hit 14, I started working at 14 because I had to. They couldn't really shoulder my expenses that I was having at that point, right? And so there's so many lessons that came from that I think are lost now when kids are just handed everything without any information with it. I don't know if you really want to, if you're okay to jump off in this direction, but the lack of visible exchange of currency is a big deal. Nobody sees or feels the value of money. It's all these digital transactions. And I think kids lose a little bit of the understanding of that money being earned. It's just numbers, if they even see it at all. You know what I mean?
Oh, no. I had a conversation last week, so I'm going car shopping, right? So I had one of my daughters in the car with me, and we're riding around and we're talking about it, and she's throwing out suggestions, right? And I didn't even know she knew what these cars were. And then she says one, and I just kind of laughed. I'm like, do you understand what that means, right? In terms of what it costs, how much time and effort that takes, right? Just the average person and walk through okay, well, if this vehicle costs X, right? And here's the median annual salary of an American, right? Net of taxes take home is approximately Y. What you suggested is some multiple of that number, right? So for the average American, they would have to work 2.5 or 3 years to afford that vehicle, assuming they had no expenses, right, net of just paying their taxes. Understand what that means, right? So if someone has that, the amount of value they have to create, the amount of themselves that they have to exchange to create that value, to get it, right? So just having that appreciation for these things don't come free, right? You have to go out and earn them. And I mean, similar to you, I started working when I got my working papers in New Jersey at the age of 15. I started working at the ShopRite that used to be around the corner. But at 10, my father used to let me borrow our lawnmower, and I used to handwrite little pull tabs and hang them up all over town. And at 10 years old, I'd ride around on a mountain bike, towing a lawnmower behind me so I could cover more ground. And anytime I saw an overgrown lawn, I would knock on the door. And that was it. And that was the first job I had. I had it, and then it was shoveling snow in the wintertime. And that was 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, got my regular job, still did some of that other stuff, started working as a construction hand, cleaning up sites at the end of the day and stuff for folks that I knew that were around town and stuff. I mean, I was always just a hustler. And I mean, really still kind of have that mentality.
Oh, well, that's one of the things that I respect about you the most, and what I like. I pride myself on surrounding myself with people that inspire me, that make me want to be better. And I mean, I can't really think of anybody that pushes me in more of those directions than you do, because I like to think I'm a hard worker, but then I bump into you and I'm reminded that there's levels to it. There's tiers. And that's one of those things that I really appreciate about you and your parenting perspective, because that's something that I know you try to instill with your daughters, and that you won't tolerate, anything less than a full commitment to whatever it is that they're doing.
Yeah, well, I mean, thank you for the kind words. But it's just leading by example, right? Like, whatever I want, like, I'm going to accomplish it, right? I'm going to set a goal. I'm going to write down what it takes to get there, and I'm going to do the first thing, and then I'm going to do the second thing. And at some point, I'm going to get there and accomplish what I want what I set out to accomplish, and I'm going to reset goals and go. But it's interesting the way that kids pick up on it. So I think I may have briefly mentioned this to you, but it was about 2 months ago, I got the flu, right? And I was in rough shape. I mean, I was bedridden for like 3 days. And my father-in-law had come over, and he was sitting in the living room talking to the kids. And I heard one of my daughters say, "Oh, he's really sick. He's not even working." So that's how they knew I was sick, is that like, oh, I'm sick, but like, oh, he's not even in his office working, even though he's sick. So clearly I've set an expectation that like, I'm just going to do whatever I have to get it done. I'll jump back to the social media comment before. Yes, I'm always busy. Yes, I'm always looking at the next thing. That's not all I do, right? I do have time to take off, right? I do find times to go play golf. I mean, of course, it's the time that I steal, right? So I kind of refer to it as stealing time. I'll go find a 6 a.m. tee time, right? On a public course, I can get on at 6. I can walk off by 9, right? 9:05, 9:10. I'm home. Everybody's just getting up, right? So like that's time that's mine. It's the only time I have available that I'm not negatively impacting other people by doing things.
Right.
So, yeah, do I cram a lot in a day? Yeah, I do. Right. Last week, Wednesday through Friday was Hartford. Came home Saturday, played a round of golf at 6 a.m. Was home shortly after 9. Grabbed the kids, went to Gasco's, grabbed all the plants, mulch, all that stuff. Did the whole front of the house. Did the house next door. Ran a couple more errands, made dinner, got to sit down and have dinner with the family, and Sunday morning I was flying to New Orleans for work and got home at 2 a.m. Monday into Tuesday. So,
wow.
Just keep moving.
Well, and that's just it. When you say work, your actual job is not even the first thing that comes to mind, right? Like, I guess how I think of it is you are maybe the biggest self-sacrificer that I know, because I feel like just about everything that you do, maybe the golf excluded, right? But there's an asterisk with that. Everything that you do is to the benefit of someone else, whether it's in your immediate family or whomever it happens to be. I remember when you were working on the house and, essentially like rebuilding it and just doing all this work and everything. That was in your downtime, with the scare quotes, right? But it's remarkable because you are so selfless. But the golf is important because I feel like hunting. I am curious as to what you would consider your like mental downtime, like your relaxation, activity. I would imagine hunting would have to fall in that somewhere. To touch on the outdoorsman aspect, but golf is important because you need that time. Like you can't. I've learned this the hard way. You can't always do for everyone else and exclusion. Like you have to find time for yourself, even if you're stealing it, even if it's just a little bit, because if your tank runs out, then it starts to negatively impact everyone else.
Oh, I mean, I say this phrase literally every day. You can't take care of anyone else if you don't take care of yourself.
Right. The oxygen mask right on the plane. You got to put it on yourself first.
No, and it's true, right? If you don't have anything to give, you can't give anything, right? There's only so much of yourself you can give away. And I don't, regardless of responsibilities, you have to make some time for yourself, right? So again, golf is part of it. I go surf casting. I train jiu-jitsu. I go bow hunting. Like I have a lot of hobbies. For a guy who keeps busy, I keep my downtime chock full of stuff to do as well. Like so, training jiu-jitsu, I usually try and do it at least twice a week at 6 a.m., right? So 6 a.m. to 7:15 in the morning. And then I try to do it a couple days a week at lunchtime. So 11:30 to 1:30. And I tell people at work, I'm like, I put it on my calendar. I'm unavailable. If people try to schedule meetings, I'm like, please find another time. They're like, well, we need to have it now. And I'm like, okay. Talk about boundaries, right? You want to have it now. right? If you're trying to schedule this week and we need to have it now, something went wrong, right? I'm a big fan of the 5 P's principle, right? Or 6 P's, depending on how you want to talk about it. Proper planning prevents poor performance, or proper planning prevents piss poor performance, depending on how you want to, how much alliteration you want to go with. But if something's an emergency, clearly someone screwed up before now, right? This didn't just become an emergency. Like 99% of the time, someone forgot something, someone didn't schedule ahead of time, someone didn't plan ahead of time, and now you've created an emergency that you're asking me to solve. Whether I do or not is up to me. Right. So like being able to stop and not own someone else's issues, to be able to backpedal and make sure that you set those boundaries appropriately and then you can throttle it, I think is important. The other part of the boundaries is like, again, I'm doing this. Like I go in, I'll start work at 6 a.m. I'll work till 11:30. I will switch a call from my laptop to my earbuds, turn the video off, grab my jiu-jitsu clothes and go to class and finish the call on the way to jiu-jitsu. Thank everybody, hang up, walk in, get dressed, check into class, and then go. And then again, I'll come home, shower, eat, back working at 2 o'clock, and I'll work till 8 o'clock at night. So I'll put in a 12-hour day with a 2-hour gap in the middle. And for me, I can compartmentalize, get my first half of the day done. I get 3 hours of work where no one's working, right, from 6 to 9. I don't have any meetings. I can actually do my stuff. From 9 to 11:30, I'm everybody else's, right? Schedule meetings, tell me what you want, who do I need to talk to, how can I help you, how do I help enable you to be better at what you do? Steal my time in the middle of the day, hey, I'm going to go do this physical thing, mentally clean the slate, come back in at 2 o'clock, I'm ready to go again, I'm energized, I've got my priority list, I can knock a few things out, but 2 to 5 is kind of everyone else's time for me again, right? I get on there, I do what I can to help, wrap stuff up at the end of the day, and then from 5 to 8, 5 to 9, that's my time again. Now I can get the rest of the stuff done I need to get done. You know, reviewing reports, reviewing proposals, making sure I can get all the stuff that I need to get done for the next day, finish with my priority list for the next day, so that way when I turn on in the morning, I don't have to think, right? I've got a list of stuff to do, I know my action items, I know what I'm accountable for, and then I move on from there.
Right, and as we were just discussing, right, preparation really is key because preparation and organization, I think, just helps streamline the whole process of everything that you're doing. But I noticed, though, in thinking about all of the hobbies that you mentioned, is to me they're all what I would consider worthwhile pursuits. And that's not to say that anyone's hobby isn't worthwhile, but there are certain things that I look for in terms of how I spend my time. Right, I'm always looking to improve myself because why wouldn't I? Right, like we're given such a finite amount of time. And I don't want to waste any of it. I want to be able at the end of the day to be like, all right, I did everything that I possibly could to be as good as I could be and to learn as much as I could, right? And so each of the things that you mentioned has an element of growth, of challenge. And 2 questions about the jiu-jitsu. First being, what is it about it that you love? How did you get involved with it? And 2, to tie it back to the parenting, is that an interest that you share with your kids, or has there been anything that's come from jiu-jitsu and to their benefit?
Yeah, I'll start with the second question first because it's easier. My daughters have gone. They enjoy watching. I've tried to get both of them involved at different times, but like my version of trying to get them involved is, hey, when you come here, would you like to do a family class? Would you like to do this? And they're pretty hesitant, and that's where it stops, right? Because, hey, if you're telling me right now, like, you don't want to tell me no, right? Because that's always a fear. It's like you float something past your kid, and they feel obligated to say yes. Right? So I do it in a way, and if you could see the apprehension, it's like, look, you don't have to give me the hard, no, if you're afraid to. Like, don't be afraid to, but just tell me no. It's fine. So they haven't really gotten into it. We have had the opportunity where one of my daughters had a classmate who was getting bullied. And I said, look, if you want to help, right, because there's only so many ways you can help and not get yourself in trouble as well.
Right.
I said, you can offer that your friend can grab one of her parents and then we can all go to jiu-jitsu together because there's a family class on Saturdays. And maybe then she could meet some other people, maybe some people in her class, build a kind of a bigger cohort of friends. If they like it, stick around, do those sorts of things. So that was an option that actually my daughter went and floated back to one of her friends and said, hey, she didn't take us up on it, but she knew it was an option, right? How I got into jiu-jitsu, My jiu-jitsu journey has been interesting. So I started actually when I was in college learning jiu-jitsu. So back in 2003 or 4.
Wow.
Just some techniques. I took a couple of elective classes because I had essentially available credits that the way that my tuition went, it was flat rate tuition regardless of number of credits.
Oh, wow.
And in order to go and do the things I wanted to do afterwards, there was a credit number that you had to hit in order to take and be certified for certain things. So I was like, well, if I have flat rate tuition, I have essentially free credits that I can take. I took every credit that I possibly could, and one of which was like a self-defense class, which was funny because I was a bouncer at a bar, right? And I was a kind of big guy, but I took it and we learned some jiu-jitsu techniques there. I didn't start training right away, but I had watched the UFC. I thought it was cool, right? And this is early 2000s. I'm young. So I started doing jiu-jitsu. I'm like, UFC is cool. Like, I'm going to go do this. And I think I started jiu-jitsu for the wrong reason. I really do. And, I may have trained kind of along that same lines of like, wanting to prove myself or whatever. There may have been some things behind it, growing up, kind of an overweight kid that got picked on, and now I can learn some stuff and, build that confidence. And I probably definitely had some deep-seated things that were there that maybe I thought I was addressing through it.
Right.
And at some point you realize like, that's really dumb. Like, and you realize what you can actually do in jiu-jitsu and what a great community it is. And I mean, I've changed schools since then, but the school that I trained at originally was fantastic. The school that I'm at now, I mean, it's like a second home. And some of those people there are some of my best friends. I talk to them every day. You build this community of people that is trying to help each other, right? And yes, is it scary from the outside in? Sure, right? Like, it's dynamic movement. It is, not the most docile sport. It's an impact sport. It's a combat sport. But now the reason I train jiu-jitsu is to get better at jiu-jitsu. And, I mean, it does such wonders for your mental health. Like your personal confidence, knowing that you know all these techniques and you're continuing to build a skill set that if you ever needed it, right, the hope is you never will. But you've got a pretty unique skill set that is pretty capable. So now I think I do it for the right reason, but I didn't start that way.
No, but I mean, you can't. We operate under the environment that we find ourselves in, right? So you have the benefit of hindsight now, and you probably weren't even aware of those potential inspirations or influences at the time, right? Like, because I remember, I think Heather and I went to our first UFC event in Atlantic City in 2003 or 2004, and it was cool. It was a lot of fun, and it had this. I know it had been around for a little while, but that was when it was sort of hitting the mainstream. So it was pretty neat to experience that. But one of the things that I love. I did regular, I don't even want to call it regular jiu-jitsu. It was really more of a self-defense style of jiu-jitsu versus, I'm assuming you're doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu?
Correct.
Okay, yeah, so it wasn't BJJ. But it just helped me with a lot of confidence issues that I was having at the time. There's so much that goes into it. But with your specific variety of it, I would imagine that it's great. You mentioned the mental health benefits, right? I think also the personal development, just in terms of character, as silly as that might sound, like you have to be humble, right? Learning humility, and if you're not, I would imagine it will humble you because I feel like there have to be certain guys who go in, maybe because they're bigger than everyone else, and maybe they go in looking to just kick ass and take names, but technique, I would imagine, surpasses all of that, and that's tough to swallow if you're getting your ass handed to you by, somebody a foot smaller and 100 pounds lighter.
I mean, there's countless videos you can look up online. There's one that circulates regularly where there's a bodybuilder that goes into a jiu-jitsu academy, challenges the black belt there, and the black belt throttles him, and then he feeds him to a female purple belt, right, who is, this guy's a bodybuilder male, probably 6 foot, 220, big, strong, or 220 or better. And this young lady is, 6 inches shorter, at least 60 pounds lighter, right? And a female. And she chokes him unconscious.
Right.
Right? With had no challenge with this guy whatsoever. That's incredibly humbling. When you're a big, strong person and you're used to being physically intimidating, right? Think about what that does when people interact, right? If somebody's taller, broader, right? Deeper voice, very direct when they talk, that's intimidating to a lot of people. Well, that person may not try to be intimidating, but that's how they're used to dealing with people, right? Everyone that they've ever encountered through their entire life has essentially taught them, right, by shared communications, that this is how you can expect people to treat you, right, with a certain level of reverence. So they develop that confidence, and sometimes that overconfidence or hubris because they go unchallenged. Well, now you walk into a room where everybody's trying to help you. But I mean, I can assure you, I've seen it time and time again, somebody who looks like Harry Potter is throttling somebody who looks like a WWE wrestler who tried to muscle their way through it and not realizing, like, hey, they're being nice to you. They're letting you work. You don't know what that means yet. But if you're going to try and muscle your way through something, you're going to go unconscious.
Right.
Like, that person can end your life. Like, and I think that's the thing about jiu-jitsu, what really humbles you, aside from the fact that cardio makes us all cowards. Look, you could be the biggest, strongest guy in the world. You start getting tired, right?
God.
You can have great jiu-jitsu. If your gas tank sucks, right, you're going to get your ass kicked. But going in there and realizing, like, hey, people are letting you work. Don't muscle your way through it, right? Like, learn the technique, learn the technical application, because if you have to force it, you're not doing it right, right? Like, what are you going to do? You're going to go in there and, like, okay, I'm a fairly advanced guy. I'm going to go into a beginner class. And I'm just going to what? Just throttle all the beginners so they don't want to come back, right? Leave them feeling like, oh, why did I come here, right? I just came here to get beat up. Like, hell no. I want every one of those people to want to stay, right? So what can I do to curate an experience when they come in, right? Male or female, but female has a couple of other things you want to consider in terms of making them feel safe, letting them know, like, hey, this is a safe place. Like, you will be respected, and making sure that you not just, say the things, but do the things so that way they feel incredibly safe and supported and feel like they have a way to communicate, heaven forbid if they didn't, right? And telling them, like, hey, if you don't feel safe rolling with somebody, whether it's from size or whatever, like, say no, right? And come over with people that you do feel safe with. But for newer people, it's like, dude, I want you to come in here and have the great experience. Like, you're not going to win training, right? No one wins training. Training is for skill development. Sometimes it takes a little bit of, like, I'll say, like, breaking a stallion, right? In terms of, like, they come in, they're strong, and it's like, hey, dude, like, just chill out, right? And then, like, they push a little bit again. It's like, hey, man, like, why don't we just, like, do this real slow? Because if you can't do it slow, you can't do it fast, right? And, like, they try to rush through stuff, and you're trying to show them, and every now and again, they need to just be humbled a little, right? So you kind of give them just a taste of it and let them know. It's like, and they get done. It's like, hey, man, like, can we just chill next time? And they're like, yeah, all right, no problem. I get it.
Right.
But you hope it doesn't come to that. I think most people now, when they join jiu-jitsu gyms, they're in a better place than we were back in 03, 04, 05 in terms of, like, that attitude era. Like, everybody was really aggressive.
The Affliction t-shirts, right? Ed Hardy, all that stuff. Those were the days.
Yeah, I'm glad we're past that.
No, 100%. And we spoke about the guys who, you mentioned being a bouncer, right? So typically the ones who are the loudest and, the most ostentatious and showy with their, alpha aggression, they're the ones that haven't fought. They're not the ones that you really have to worry about, because it's the guy who's not trying to get into the fight, I would imagine, right? And you've mentioned this with yourself in personal instances. You know that you can win. You don't need to prove yourself at all. If anything, you're trying to help the person by not hurting them, right, and not allowing them to hurt themselves. So I think that, again, thinking back to, like, the Ed Hardy and the Affliction stuff, it was just such a weird toxic time, I think, in terms of, like, the aesthetic and what people were trying to put out there.
Yeah, the music, the everything. Everybody was a tough guy, and look, being tough isn't cool, right? Like, kindness is cool. Always has been, right? Society may have said different, or may have interpreted it differently. In terms of the guy who's loud and boisterous, not always being dangerous. Look, everybody's dangerous. You have no idea what people are capable of. Biggest, strongest guy in the world. You could bench press 500 pounds. You could be a black belt in jiu-jitsu. Somebody takes out a blade and sticks you. Guess what? Right? You had 2 lungs. Now you have 1. Right? Now it's filling with blood. Now you're drowning on yourself, and now you're asking for help. Right? Like, so. There's never a good time to fight. There's never a good time to be a tough guy. Like, I would walk 10 miles out of my way to avoid it, right? The coolest place to be if any physical confrontation comes down is miles away. Not sitting there filming it, not doing whatever, right? Not getting in between it. just not being there, right? Like I've had situations, and I've shared these with you. Like I've had people try to fight me over stuff I can't even fathom, like even get into an argument over, let alone fighting.
Right.
And I'm like, whatever I did wrong to you, sorry. I don't know what it is, right? And maybe you'll tell me, but I don't want any problem, right? If we're out at a bar, not that I drink anymore, but great, I'll buy you a beer. If my bad, right? If we're somewhere else and I did something, tell me what it is, and I'll sincerely apologize for it. If you're still pissed off, I don't know what to tell you, right? Because we're done here, right? Like if I did something offensive, it's over. I want nothing to do with it. And I think that's part of like, I understand what can happen, right? Like I can't unlearn, not that I'm the baddest guy in the world, but like a regular person comes up. We see it in jiu-jitsu all the time. Somebody who comes in who considers himself a tough guy, and they get humbled by people like easily, right? Like you can't unlearn how to do that.
Right.
So please don't make me. Like I'll literally will just turn around and ideally turn around and walk away. I won't turn my back, but I will create as much distance between me and that person as possible. Try and create enough attention to where someone makes it stop so I can get the hell out of Dodge.
Right. And I think a lot of that comes from you being not just the secure guy, but a fulfilled person. You have a lot of things in your life that you derive meaning from, right? And that you seek out meaning with. And one of the topics that I was hoping to discuss with you specifically was bullying, because that was the part of the conversation at Powerhouse that I really was inspired by, because I didn't realize that it was something that you dealt with as a kid too. But as we said that day, like the nature of bullying, who constitutes a bully now, it's different. It's not like the playground, the big, 150-pound fourth grader that, wants to pancake squish you. Like it's the shit that happens outside of school, that happens, with this gang mentality of a bunch of kids all coming together and spamming, another kid's phone, or just, I don't even want to go into the list of the litany of, things that people do.
Making cruel memes, doing deep fakes, doing all kinds of stuff.
And so for me, rather than just flinging it at you, I feel like that comes from a place that's the opposite of where you are. That comes from people who don't have anything in their lives. Like they don't feel fulfilled. They don't have, I don't even want to call it a moral compass. They just don't have anything worthwhile in their lives, and I think that's a way of acting out, What are your thoughts on that?
I think it depends on the age, right? Like if there's adults still doing that, and you see that
I meant
behavior.
the adults. I wasn't even talking about the kids. Oh yeah, no, I meant the adults. The kids, the kids are just mimicking. In so many instances, I feel like the kids are just mirroring the parents.
They are. That's that is learned behavior, right? And I can't tell you the amount of times you've seen kids act a certain way, but adults too, where they are motivated by things that have no value, right? Like if you find somebody who's motivated by material possessions or money, right? That's fleeting. You're only as good as the next thing, right? You're never going to be satisfied, right? The best thing in the world is going to become the most tiresome thing in short order, right? So you have to derive value from somewhere else. For me, it's just, I just want to see a better version of me, whatever that is, right? If it's at, ideally parenting, right? Because that to me is the most important. Like I want to be more patient, right? Because I'm not always the most patient person in the world. I'd love to sit up here and be like, perfect dad, right? I wish that were true, right? I get frustrated, right? I voice those frustrations. But I also think even when I do lash out like that, right? It's explaining why. Right, like so. If it comes to chores with the kids, and I know I'm getting off topic, but I promise I'll bring it back. We have certain expectations that things get done, right? And if I'm working the schedule that I work, right, the 6 to 12, and then the 2 to 8, and I put in a 12-hour day plus 2 hours at jiu-jitsu, and then I made dinner, right? And there's little things like the recycling's not out, and the laundry hasn't been changed over, and stuff like that we've established norms that the girls do that. And I have to do that now at 9 o'clock at night as they're getting ready for bed. And I'm just like, guys, like, should I really have to do this, right? And then there'll be times where, let's say I take a break at 6 o'clock to make dinner, and all that stuff is undone, and I'm like, all right, we're going to take 15 minutes, and we're going to do it all. And in 15 minutes, three or four of us get it all done. And I'm like, why do I have to put my foot in the ground and call everyone's attention to it to do this stuff? Like, you guys know it needs to get done, and I get it, it's not fun, right? But it's also not fun when you're having to do what I do and then come in and do it at the end of the day. Like, is that fair to me? And usually the girls are just like, Dad, we got it. No problem. Just, go back and do whatever. I'm like, no, I'm going to do it with you. Because once I started it,
right.
I'm going to see it through. But I'm going to tell you, I don't like to have to be the one to go and remind you, like, hey, can you help me with this? Like, it's annoying to have to ask. Like, so if you could meet me maybe a little bit quicker, and say, hey, when I get home from school, I'm going to go through, I'm going to do my homework, and then we're going to take 10 minutes, and just knock the stuff out together so Dad doesn't have to ask us, right? Because it doesn't feel good. But that's an expectation that we set. In the same token, the girls get a lot, right? So we support all their activities. We bring them to places, hell, I don't even know what to get them for the next holiday or birthday or whatever, because, they truly have, they're fortunate, but it's one of those things where we've set expectations on both sides. The whole bullying thing, I just don't get. I don't have time for it. I don't have time to cause problems. I have enough problems of my own. I don't need to create new ones, right? I don't have time to hate. I don't have energy for it, right? Seriously, I don't have energy to dislike somebody. I either include people in my life or I don't.
Right.
That's it. Like if you wronged me in a certain way and I don't like you anymore, I just don't think of you.
Right. You don't exist.
Like, it's pretty easy.
But to tie it to something that you just referenced, right? You said 15 minutes of working together with the girls. I would imagine that you carve out specific family time too, right? Like to spend time as a family to do things.
Of course.
And as silly as this might sound, I do wonder. Like, I feel like there may be a correlation between family time, or maybe even just dinner time, if you want to just narrow it down to one specific thing. Like growing up, at least for us, like there was dinner time. You sat as a family, whether it was 15, 20 minutes, whatever it was, you spoke about your day. It was, important. And now, I mean, go to any diner, go out to any restaurant where there's a family. The odds are the kids are on the phone, the parents are on the phones. They're not interacting together. And so there's just that, I don't know, I just feel like that in some way may be tied to bullying, because the lack of social awareness, the lack of social intelligence, like they just...
What's the need for constant stimulation?
And that too. Oh, right, absolutely.
Like, silence is okay, right? Boredom is okay, right? Not having this constant stream of inputs is normal. Like
it should be.
Right. Like, I monitor my phone time all the time. Like, what am I using? Why am I using it? And I can't tell you how many times and my wife laughs at me, because she'll look at me as I'm on my phone and she'll look at the reaction on my face and she knows what I'm doing. She's like, why? I'm like, you're right. Like, how many times I've typed a response on social media and deleted it before I even sent it. I'm like, because your initial reaction is, oh, I want to engage, right? Like I see friends of mine have businesses and I want to like their posts, or friends of mine have podcasts and put up these, hey, check this out, or whatever. Here's a video, or hey, here's a post about whatever. And I want to be supportive to folks that matter, so I do go on to engage. But I find myself sometimes when you get these people that are the I can't catch a break people, right? And they're every week is a different story about something that went wrong, and they're just fishing for compliments or whatever. And I'm like, I start typing a response, and I catch myself, and I'm like, there's no way it gets taken right, and there's no way it ends here. Like, why are you doing this? So, I don't know. For me, I have to catch myself because I want to be helpful, but there's only so much of me to give, and I just have to call it a day. And my wife is a pretty good barometer for that. She's like, if you have to look at me while you're doing it, like, just you should stop doing what you're doing.
Well, so that's a great question that I had meant to ask earlier. In terms of the girls and their own social media activities, are they on social media?
Nope.
Is that something that... So I'm noticing a theme here, by the way, in these parenting conversations that I've been having in terms of just the oversight, the level of interaction. Social media, I don't want to call it banning, but limiting access. And I don't know, you can tell me in a second. Like, for me... My kids don't have an interest in social media, but it's something that we've spoken about at length. Like, I've explained it to them, I've shown it to them. I don't want to add an element of mystery to it by, completely cutting them out from it. luckily for me, like they just are disinterested on their own, you know. So in terms of your approach with your girls, how have you guys handled that dialogue, if any, when it comes to social media, and then what is their level of interest in it?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think they would like it to be, you know, they'd like to have access to it. Right now, they don't. You know, no Facebook, no Instagram, no X. They didn't, before TikTok got banned, that was not even a consideration. No Snapchat or anything like that. And I do think it's fairly rare at this point. You know, when you get middle school age, getting ready to go to high school, and they don't have those things. But we've had specific examples of things getting misconstrued, right? Where there's an event, people are there, something happens, one person says one thing, one person says another thing, things get out of control, their name either gets brought into it directly or tangentially, and they see firsthand how these things can go awry very quickly. And then they share with us how some of these things have gone awry with, you know, bullying in school and interactions there. And I'm like, what could you do with that? What could you do with social media that you can't do now? And how would it improve your life? Right? Like, let's answer those questions first. And look, when I say that to them, I should have a mirror. Like, one of them should hold a mirror at the same time. And I should be asking it to myself. And I justify my usage in certain ways. But I think at our ages, we should be mature enough to be like, hey, I understand the right and wrong way to use this. Clearly, if I look across all the stuff that I get to intake, if I do use it, not everybody understands that. They clearly don't have the context, right, to understand how to responsibly interact with people, how to not get caught up in things, right, where one of your friends is doing something and they're your friend, so you're with them doing it or part of it, and then you get roped into it, and next thing you know, right, it's a problem, and now you're part of the problem, and now you have to explain your way out of it. And I have a friend who does crisis management for a living, and I use this phrase regularly. He said it's like arguing with your wife, right? When you're explaining, you're losing.
Right.
Right? And I tell my kids that all the time. If you have to explain your behavior, you screwed up.
Right.
Right? Because what you do shouldn't require explanation, right? If what you do was on the front page of the newspaper, right, you wouldn't want to have to explain your actions. So consider that before you do it. Because when you're explaining, you are 100% losing.
Right, and that's one of those difficult ones, right? It's some people believe it's better to ask for forgiveness and permission, but I think in certain instances, putting a little, just that dollop of care before you take an action, especially at the ages that our kids are, I think it goes a long way, because I think too many kids don't. They're not fearful of the consequences, you know. And again, I hate the soapbox, but it's one of those things. I saw a meme at some point where it showed, 1980s classroom where the parent is looking at the kid. The teacher said something that the kid did, and the parent is looking at the kid going, how could you let this happen? And then fast forward to today, and the parent is pointing at the teacher saying, how could you let this happen? There's no accountability for anything essentially at this point, And again, I just think putting a little more care into thinking about your motivations, thinking about what you're doing, and the consequences. I mean, there needs to be consequences, but that's a separate.
Oh, there's a lot to unwrap there. So yes, consequences. I mean, look, and don't just threaten, right? Like, if you're going to threaten consequences, you have no choice at that point, right? That goes back to the negotiation of like, hey, if you do this, I'm going to take away your phone for a week or whatever. And they do it. Well, guess what? You don't get it back in 3 days or 2 days or whatever. It's the week. Like, I don't care if you're behaving and can I do this? I understand. I appreciate it. No. Right? And just be consistent. I think that's a huge piece of it. What else?
Well, follow through is definitely that's got to be the biggest thing that's lacking, because I've seen it mostly at like the sports fields and various things, right? Like where, the kid's acting up and the parent just like makes an idle threat that sounds good, but you can just tell by the kid's reaction that there's no follow through. They've heard it 1,000 times. It's meaningless. And, it's almost Pavlovian in the sense of like, they just learn from that when there's another situation and another threat, even if it's new, it's the same thing. And so they take that experience at home and then extrapolate, and they start to act that way in school. I mean, I'm sure you've seen a lot of these kids riding, their bikes down the freaking middle road, pulling wheelies and stuff. Like, that's absurd. I can't imagine even contemplating doing something like that as a kid, because I wouldn't have been allowed on the bike for a year if something like that happened,
Well, and then, cursing and flipping off adults and things like that, where it's just, and my kids told us about it, right? And who they, that they'd come across, some of them or whatever. And I said, look, you've clearly identified this as behavior you don't want to be associated with. It's all I needed to hear, right? You figured it out. I'm going to go back to something you said before, though, with the whole meme with the teachers. I think this is a totally another episode, so I'm going to open a door and try and close it as close as possible. But society has changed, right? When we grew up, you were able to have a single income family and make it work, right? Nowadays, that's a rarity, right? So when I grew up, having a parent in the home was not uncommon, right? There were still two working families at times, but you could get it done. Now it's almost a requirement, right? Or if you're going to have a single income family, one of the parents, right, the working parent, has to make a very, very good living to accommodate it, right?
Enough for two people,
right? So when you take out that supervision, right, the person that can help with the homework, the person that can talk about what happened at school, and have those like everyday interactions that may not be these scheduled, structured things, that has an impact, right? So when the kids are, I don't know if they even use this term anymore, latchkey kids, like when we were growing up, they get dropped off before school, they're at school all day, and then they stay in the after school programs. The parents pick them up, they pick up food on the way home, they don't have a home cooked meal, the kid chokes it down, the parents go to do something else. There's very little interaction. So I understand why sometimes parents look at the teachers, because that is the constant, right? From the teacher's perspective, it's terrifying because you likely have a family of your own, right? You don't have you don't have room in your life for 20 more children that you have to take care of. But the way that these families have to work in order to just make ends meet and, keep everything moving along and do what they think is best for their family requires them to be away and place that faith in those people unwittingly a lot of times, right? Where that responsibility tends to fall on somebody who's not a primary caregiver, who's an educator. So I didn't mean to open that ball of wax, but it's an issue, right?
No, it is. And that's a perfect segue to another aspect of parenting that I was hoping to touch on with you, in that, you referenced the single income households, right? More often than not, it was a stay-at-home mom. Mom was the present. Mom was the glue for the household. Dad was the worker. And clearly gender roles have shifted. Opportunities have changed. There's just, it's a different time now. Clearly I'm home, that primarily, the writing, the podcasting, and all that stuff is more because I have the time. It's not because that's, the purpose of me being home. And so I think it's allowed for this shift in dynamics, this change in terms of the interactions between parents and kids, right? I had mentioned this in the last episode. Like, the only stay-at-home dad I can think of from, like, in terms of like the public consciousness was Danny Tanner from Full House, right? Like, you're not Danny Tanner.
And he was a widower.
Right, and he was a widower. Right, exactly. And so there are very few instances of a dad who, and this is to speak specifically to the father-daughter relationship, right, being a girl dad. Like, there weren't many stay-at-home dads or dads who were, very prominent in the parenting of their children that looked like you or maybe me, right? But I think of you as like, with all due respect, like, you're as close to Captain America as I could think of, right? In terms of all of your interests, your abilities, right? And I don't mean that like, I mean that sincerely, that like, you just exude what I think of as like the perfect balance of manliness, right? Because we hear that shit all the time, toxic masculinity and all these different phrases, right? Like, in terms of just being a man, the things that I think of, what I would want to instill in my kids, that's what you embody. And so I'm curious, and to be fair, like, you and your wife are equally involved with the household. It's definitely even footings, but you have your role too. In other words, you don't shuck that responsibility. You take up your share, right? And so your level of interaction with your daughters is pretty high. And I'm just curious, being for lack of a better term, like a guy's guy, and having all these masculine or stereotypically masculine interests, how has that influenced your relationships with them, if it has, and how, has there been an exchange maybe of like masculinity and femininity between you and the girls?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think when we found out we were pregnant with our first, right, and finding out it was a girl, I think I had this oh shit moment where I was like, oh, what does this mean, right? Because when I grew up, right, all my friends were boys, and then all my cousins were boys, and that's everything I knew. Like, what the hell do I know about girls? Like, I knew about it from dating, right? But it's clearly different. So, I mean, you had to learn it all, and I really had to rely on my wife in terms of, hey, what some of this stuff is. I mean, at the earliest ages, right, there's no difference, right? It's a small child that's learning and figuring stuff out. But, now they're 13 and 11, right? They have emotions, they're developing personalities and all that. And, I mean, throughout, like, it's just leaning on my wife, asking questions, and not overthinking it. Right? Like, just being present in whatever it is that's happening. If it's, they both cheered, right? I was the cheer dad, right? I was there at cheer. I knew all the cheers. I could still do them now. I won't, not on camera. But I learned them all, right? So as they were practicing, I'm practicing with them. I don't know. There's just nothing that was off limits. Like, I wasn't like too proud or too masculine to do something. I don't care, right? Okay, diaper bag. Oh, there's a pink blanket or this or that. So what? What is that? Does that somehow, like, because I have two daughters and they're dressed in pink and I have a pink burping blanket over my shoulder that I'm less of a man because I'm engaged in that? Like, I mean, there was days where, back when, and Michelle was at the restaurant when Gabriella was first born, I would take her out and I would go somewhere and I'd go into a restroom to change her and there was no changing table.
Right.
Those were only in women's rooms.
Yep.
So I'd come out and I'd be pissed because I'm a patron of the restaurant and I'd have to ask somebody to go into the women's room to make sure it was clear so I could then go use the changing table. And there was one instance I remember where a woman walked in and I was just sitting there using the changing table and she verbally had, communicated that she didn't think it was right for me to be in there. And I understood her initial reaction, right? Imagine the shock. Kind of a big guy in there with his daughter. Like, what the hell are you doing in here? And I explained to her, I said, well, there isn't one of these in the men's room. So I had to go up front, talk to a manager, and have them check to make sure this is clear, because otherwise I'd have to run back out to my car, leave the table alone, and do everything else. I'm like, this was the best option because I parked pretty far away. And she was like, what do you mean there's not one in there? I'm like, there's not a changing one in the men's room. You can go look. It's I'm sure it's empty. I'll go check for you. And then I came home and talked to my wife, and I'm like, man, like, this is bothersome because it's not the first time it's happened. Then there's times where we go to the doctors and it's both of us, right? And what do I notice? The doctors talk to my wife. They don't talk to me. And I'm like, hey, like, I'm pretty good at this parenting thing. Like, I'm not here as just like the driver or the guy that, like, just, the bodyguard or whatever. Like, I'm here as an engaged father. Like, talk to me as well. I can answer the questions you're asking her. Not that she's not capable, but I noticed a pattern after a while. It was around the same time of like, oh, there's no changing rooms here. The doctors always ask my wife the questions and not me. And like, that helped me understand, like, society 10 years ago didn't have answers for these things. They weren't ready for dads to be engaged, especially not for girls. And I'm like, I don't care, boy, girl, any gender. Like, I want to be engaged in my kid's life. I want them to know that I understand as best I can what they're going through. And I've shared those experiences with them. So that way, if they do need me for something, even if they don't want to ask me right out, like, I'm there, right? I'm available, right? So, I mean, I think that's been always the thing is I don't want to miss something, right? I miss enough doing the stuff that I have to do for work and everything else and work travel. I don't want to miss anything else. I sure as hell don't want to be shut out of it.
Right. And I love, you just made me think of a couple of different instances where I had the same experience. I'm curious, and you may not know offhand, but like, I would bet that those were male doctors, more than likely, that were probably engaging with your wife that way. And I don't know if you've had this experience too, but in a lot of instances where there's something involving a payment of some sort, and again, usually it's a guy, they look at me, right? And they come to me for it. And I have to direct them like, no, she's the moneymaker here, And it's funny because I'm secure enough that it doesn't bother me, whether it was for a car, for the house, or whatever. But it was like they were visibly uncomfortable because they were like, "Oh, this is different." And I'm like, "Well, it is what it is. I don't know what to tell you."
I've got a great story about that, and it's the opposite. So when I was going out to buy a truck back in 2015, 16, whatever, I was going shopping for a truck, and we were looking at all different dealerships, and there was one that we stopped at, and we went out, and we were, just seeing what they had on the lots and perusing the internet, and found one that I thought was, close. So we went out and talked, and there was a female car salesperson that came out. And my wife and I are standing there, we're looking at the truck, and we just had some feedback, and my wife was just popping out questions, right? Because we really share responsibility, right? So whether that's at home, whether that's buying decisions, right? I respect her opinion, she respects mine. We don't always get what we want, right? Sometimes somebody has to win, somebody has to lose because you have to make a decision. You can't make everybody happy all the time, right? But over a long enough time period, right, it's balanced. So we go there and we're looking at this vehicle and it didn't have the big back doors, right? Which she was like, hey, this is important in case we go somewhere. My parents are tall people, right? The kids are probably going to wind up being tall. Like, you're going to have the vehicle for a while, so think ahead. And the female car salesperson says, well, who's going to be driving it anyway? And I'm standing looking at Michelle, and I look at her and I go, go ahead. I just turn around and walk away. And I literally, it's like it was out of a movie. Like, I just started strolling away, and Michelle turns around and she's like, let me explain something to you. And I was like, oh, here it goes, right? And it was that weird notion of like, oh, because it's a truck, oh, it's going to be his. I'm just going to speak to him. It's like, if you disrespect my wife, there's zero chance. Like, I don't care if you knock $20,000 off the price. I'm not buying it from you anyway. I'm just going to let this run its course because she deserves to get her pound of flesh before we leave.
Right.
But, like, this isn't how that works, right? Like, I have the utmost respect for her and make sure that if that ever does happen, this conversation's over.
Right. Oh, my gosh. Well, and to speak of your wife, she's another person that I have an immense amount of respect for. And obviously, I don't know, the intricacies of your marriage or relationship, but you guys seem to operate very smoothly, from an external perspective. And I know from my end of it that usually when it looks like that, there's a lot of work that happens behind the scenes. And I'm curious if you would put communication near the top of the list in terms of what helps you to be successful and parent together and run a household together and just do all the things that you do.
Yeah, I mean, it's both verbal communication and nonverbal communication, right? And reading kind of the nonverbal cues. Because, I mean, there's days where there's things that I would normally do, right? And I use this weekend as an example, right? I flew out to New Orleans Sunday, was out there all day, was there Monday, came in at like 2 a.m., right? It was like 1:50. I finally got to bed around 2:30, and I had to get up early, right? Normally I'm up early. I make coffee. I kind of go about the house, make breakfast for the kids and everything like that, and kind of get that stuff moving just because I'm naturally an earlier person. We have a shared responsibility model that, stem from something we had to deal with as a family in terms of the girls. So even then we kind of said, hey, you like being up late at night more. I like being up early in the morning. So when we had to kind of take shifts on things, that's kind of the norm that we had set. So this time, like, I wasn't up to make coffee, but she knew she asked me when I came in, she's like, hey, what time's your first call? What do you have to do? I said, it's 8 o'clock. She got up early, slipped out of bed, made coffee, came in, delivered me coffee, was like, hey, I know you have to get up early. I wanted you to get as much sleep as you could, right? There's days where I know, like, I'm away. She's, going to be doing stuff with the kids. She's got Gabriella horseback riding or whatever. And I'm like, hey, on the way home, stop at Esposito's and pick up, pizza, right? So one for you and Ava and a gluten-free for Gabriella so she can have it because I know it's on the way and she'll stop and pick it up or something. Or I'll just be like, hey, you guys making out? Oh, what are you guys doing for dinner? Oh, we don't know. It's like, well, how about I do such and such, right? And I'll just jump on one of the apps and get the food delivered to the house just to take the pressure off. And it's just understanding the things that make life easier, right? There's times where, like, if I leave and I know I'm going to be gone for a couple of days, and I know generally about when she's got like nail appointments and stuff coming up because we have a calendar at the house. She writes all the stuff on it. So before I leave, I'll go over to the nail place and I'll get her a gift certificate for it, right? And just leave it someplace conspicuous, right? Not give it to her, but like then when I leave and she gets it, she's like, oh, you know what? He thought about me. here's this thing, I'm going to go and use it so I don't have to, take money out of my pocket. And it was thoughtful, right? And it helps relieve some of that pressure. I think that's some of that stuff that you pick up over time. And I mean, again, reading body language, not putting people in situations where they're set up to fail, right? Not thrusting responsibility on them that isn't fair, right? Making sure you kind of meet them halfway plus a little, right? And I think that's the thing that makes it work is I think both of us are good at certain things. Both of us aren't quite as good at certain things. So we each kind of meet each other halfway plus a little bit. Again, generally, there's weeks where some people do more than others, but you don't ever want to feel like you're the one that's deficient, right? And as long as you have that understanding and that willingness to go a little more than halfway for one another on a regular basis, it's pretty easy.
Well, because so people think of compromise, right, as being a big thing in a marriage. But if you want to, parse the language, that's 50-50. And I agree more with you that it's never 50-50. It shouldn't be, because sometimes you need to shoulder the load a little more. Sometimes you're not able to shoulder it, and so it's not always about what's fair. It's about, on a long enough time scale, having things be balanced, I think.
Well, and it's aligning with the things that you're good at, right? Like you don't try and thrust someone into a role that they're not going to be good at, right? Especially if you are, right? So I think that's important as well in terms of, here's the things that I'm going to do, right? I'll give you an example. Like I do a lot of things that, are wife type things, right? I do a lot of the grocery shopping, right? I do a lot of the cooking, right? People are, oh, well, you do all the cooking? And I'm like, yeah, I actually enjoy it.
Same.
Right? So Michelle's like, yeah, he does the cooking, right? And there's other things that she does around the house that I despise, right? And we do meet halfway. And I have no problem taking those, generationally historical, female/wifely things because I actually enjoy doing it. And she doesn't. So why the hell would we build something just based on the fact that this is the way our grandparents and our parents had done it, that this is the role she needs to take and learn how to do this well? It's like, well, no, if I enjoy it and I do it well and you don't enjoy it and you admittedly don't do it as well, which I think she's still very proficient, but she hates it, well, great, then I'll just do that thing. Then we shift something else and make sure that it's a balance across the both of us. I think that's important.
Completely. And I think what's sort of tacit in everything you just said is respect. You respect her, you respect her abilities, you respect limitations and things of that nature. So, for example, I'm in the same boat. I love to cook. Heather can cook, but it's more of a passion of mine. I love it. It's something, and I'm good at it. It's just one of those things that I, take the mantle of. Laundry is an interesting example, right? To go with stereotypical stuff. That's a good example of something that, like, I have a very, prototypical type A personality, hyper, efficient. If, I want to figure out the most efficient way to do something, and then that's it. That's how I do it. And that's not how the world operates more often than not. That's not how my wife operates at all points, right? Like, and so it's learning how to work with one another. So, for example, with the laundry, like, she may do things a certain way. It may take her an extra day or two to get, like, it may not all happen at once. Whereas for me, it's a process. It's got to be like this. And learning to back off of that and communicate that. Like, you know what? Okay, look, if you're going to do it, you do it. I'm not going to say anything about it. Because I think that's how a lot of stupid fights begin, is over silly things like that. And that's kind of why I brought up communication at the beginning, because one of the most important things that Heather and I did in our relationship, literally out of the gate, was we got into an argument over something silly really early on. And I realized, like, oh crap, like, if this was my parents, they would be like, name calling, like, all kinds of, the vitriolic language and stuff. And I was like, nope, we're not going to do that. Like, that's not going to happen here, because that just escalates. It doesn't solve anything. And so we, to make a long story short, we established certain words that were outlawed. Like, we wouldn't say it. We wouldn't, no name calling, just certain things that were not conducive to an actual conversation, and that's why I asked about communication, because I found, for us at least, that was an important foundation that's, parlayed into how we operate with the kids. It's the same thing. Like, you'll never hear them say something stupid or whatever. There's just certain words that the connotations just, they're always negative. So we've just sort of, plucked them out of the vernacular here.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think Michelle and I have gotten to the same place in terms of the ability to communicate with one another, but we're just very candid. Like, if I don't like something, I'm not going to, like, hide it or whatever. Like, I'm just going to tell you. Right? And same thing with her. Like, I think if people were a fly on the wall for a week in our house, they would be shocked at how just direct we are with one another. Because I think that is something that I've seen in relationships that I've been in before, and what I've seen in other people's relationships as I was growing up is like this lack of directness and candor about certain things. And like, yeah, there's a level of decorum, right? You're gonna do the right thing at the right time, right? You're not gonna go, if your wife spent all day cooking, right, and you're not just gonna be like, oh, this is absolutely horrific, right? Like, you'll eat it if you can, you'll appreciate it, and then hey, you'll talk about the recipe next time. And at some point she's going to go, really wasn't that good, was it? And you go, let's work together next time, right? You say something like that, right? But you have a level of decorum where you're not going to just thrash somebody for no reason, right? Because they know it, right? Like, very few people are going to be that shocked when you hit them with with something like that. So I think it's just the modicum of respect is the most important part of it. And again, for us, it's, if she wants me to do something, right, don't suggest it, don't whatever, right? Just, hey, I'd like you to do this. Okay. Is that it? Kind of opens the door for more, and it's like, oh, crap. Now I'm getting a list, right? Or the worst is you're sitting there, you just get comfortable, you're like, all right, just had dinner, I'm going to relax. And she goes, do you have a tape measure? I'm like, oh, boy. Come on. You're like, all right, what are we trying to do, right? Like, I'll get the tape measure. You tell me what you're trying to do. Like, are we trying to build something? Are you looking for something? Like, so we just got an electric fireplace, and she was looking for that. I said, okay, let's measure this together. I'll show you what it looks like so you can sit out and sketch it out. And there's a lot of times where she has an idea, and I just activate it, like, right now. Like, I knew for the spring she was going to want to take care of all the mulch and the flowers and stuff, so I knew I was traveling a lot. I said, hey, I'm home on Saturday. Come on, girls, we're going to Gasco's. We're getting the stuff from Mommy. You guys know what she likes in terms of theme and color and all. I can do the heavy lifting and the paying for stuff. Let's go. So we got home. We just started going. Michelle's like, oh, we're doing this right now. I was like, yeah, like, you want it done and I'm going to be gone. So let's make sure it gets done before I leave. So that way you're not looking at it. And then other people in the neighborhood start doing that work. And now all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'd really like that done. So then it becomes this thing that you want to get done. I mean, at this point, you've been together for 20 years. 20 years in June. June 10th will be 20 years. We'll have been dating. May 22nd, we'll be 15 years married. So you start to understand and predict. You're like, okay, so we always try and like lead the neighborhood, not to beat anybody, but for my own personal sanity of like, oh, it's time to decorate for this holiday. Done. Okay, it's time to decorate for this holiday. Okay, cool, done. Like, and I want to get it done because I don't want everyone else to be ready and her not to be, because I know that creates anxiety. It creates, feelings of like, oh, I wanted to do this, but now I'm behind, right? And it creates all that stuff at home. It's like, no, that's easy to avoid. So let's just get it done and avoid it.
Right. And I love that you just mentioned holidays, because this was something I was thinking of earlier, right? If I had to sum you up in one anecdote, it would be Memorial Day, because I think, I don't know if you've posted recently, but I remember seeing different posts that you've put, on Facebook in years past or whatever, and we've spoken about it specifically, the actual importance of the holiday and the pushback that you've given when people start, bugging out about the unofficial start of summer and whatnot. And I couldn't tell you when we actually spoke about it. It was years ago at this point. But I remember being really blown away by just the level of care that you put into this, and then also like the importance that you put on sharing it with the girls. And that's the anecdote that sort of spurred me in terms of like you taking those parts of yourself and then, sharing it with them and sort of leading by example and giving them, because, Memorial Day's not the most cheerful holiday if you're aware of like what it actually is.
Yeah. So, I mean, I appreciate you calling out. I mean, we've gone to, cemeteries to make sure that the flags were where they were supposed to be. We've gone to the Vietnam War Memorial and actually witnessed the service they do there. It's just trying to make sure that they understand, like, and have the context for it, right? Because it's easy that, the media and everyone's like, oh, barbecues, Memorial Day, this and that. And it's like, I get it, right? It's a long weekend. It's summertime. The weather is finally getting nice. It's warm, but it's not too hot. Pools are getting open. It's time to have fun. And I completely agree. I'm not a buzzkill. But there's a reason we have that day, right? And I don't ever want that to be lost, right? Like, over generation, the 250 some odd years America's been around, millions of Americans have, tens of millions of Americans have written this country a blank check, right? Either voluntarily or involuntarily in terms of the draft at different points. And not all of them, some of them were fortunate enough to not have that check cashed, but a lot of them did. And that's the reason for that day. And there will never be a Memorial Day where we don't have that conversation, right? We may not be in a place to go to the memorial and do that thing, but they need to understand and have reverence for the fact that tough people, strong people, fought and died for the things that you have. And the reason you're able to live the life that you live is because of their sacrifice. And if you ever convene that sacrifice, we will have a different conversation.
And again, our bingo card, right? Perspective. It's what it comes back to. And I think it's something a lot of people lack. And I love getting to talk with you to sort of, bring it full circle here. Because I always walk away with a new perspective, with new appreciation for things. And I love that. And there's not enough people that offer that. So that's for what it's worth. Because I remember, it's funny, I can't tell you at this point how many people I've asked to come on and be a guest on the podcast, and they were, sort of humbly like accepting of it, but also like, well, I don't know why, people would want to hear me talk or whatever. Like that's why. It's because you inspire me, not just through your actions, but also the explanations, right? That you have motivations. You don't seem like a rash guy who just does shit, not know why you do it. Like there's always a valid, venerable motivation behind what you do. And so just personally, that's something that I really draw a lot of inspiration from, and it inspires me to try to do the same. I'm not keeping pace with you, in a lot of regards, right? But
life isn't a race.
No, of course.
Like, so I'm going to cut in for just a second, but like, I think you do great. I think the way that you engage with your kids, the way that you support them through their activities, the way that you're constantly present, the way that you lead by example, and you do so much good stuff. So A, stop selling yourself short. And B, never compete, right? Like, that's one thing I wish I could get across to my kids, right? It goes back to the social media comment you said before. I'm not in competition with anybody, right? Outside, right? I'm in competition with one person, and that's me, right? I just want to beat me. I don't give a shit what it is. If I'm on the Peloton, right, and I'm doing a 20-minute ride, and here's my PR, I want a PR every time. Right? Every single time. If I'm running, I want to run further. If I'm doing jiu-jitsu, I want to do jiu-jitsu longer. If I'm lifting, I want to lift heavier or more or whatever. If I'm getting promoted at work, I want to keep getting promoted. I just want to do, like, that's it. I'm not in competition with someone else. Like, I'll tell you, I got a promotion last year, which is something I've been working for 18 years. I was part of a leadership development program in 2018. Other people that were in that program got that same promotion in 2018, then in 2019. Different people in 2020, 21, 22, and finally I got it, right? And I was one of the last people out of that leadership class to get it. I understand why, right? Certain things had to happen. There were certain business cases. There were certain other things that needed to kind of play their course, and I needed to be patient. That was a humbling experience, and it made me realize, like, yes, do I want to be one of the first people out of that class to go? Absolutely. Once I got to that level, right, and I had the hindsight now to look back, if I would have gotten it when I wanted it, I probably wouldn't have done as well, right? I would have struggled more. I learned so much more in the gap between when I went through that program and when I actually got it, that I was infinitely better prepared to be successful the first year at it. And that's not something 2018 me was mature enough. Even at that point, right? 15 years out in the industry, was mature enough to handle because I wanted it that bad. And I kind of wanted it for the wrong reason, right? And now in retrospect, when I finally did get it, yes. Was it a weight lifted off my shoulders? Absolutely. Was it a reason to celebrate? Sure. But I felt like I was set up for success so much better. And I think that's something that a lot of people need to come to terms with, is like, Andy Frisella uses this phrase, aggressive patience, right? Oh, it's, be patient, good things come to those who wait. It's like, no. His whole aggressive patience is, hey, work as hard as you possibly can to make it happen, but understand it doesn't happen overnight. Right. And I never had a phrase for that. Like, I'm like, all right, cool. I'm going to steal that, but I'll still give credit for it. But I think that's been a theme throughout. It's like, I need to be aggressively patient. I need to do everything I think I can in my power to get me where I want to go and accept the fact that it's not going to happen on my timeline. And that's hard for some people because they're so willing to give up what they want for what they want right now.
Yeah, right. That's so true. And just to clarify, right? So that's another one of those things that we share. The only person that I consider myself to be in competition with is myself every day. Unfortunately, every moment of every day, it feels at times, right? And where you come into that picture is sort of the same thing with basketball and my kids, right? Like, it's very easy to become the best locally, the best whatever, but are you really the best? Like, there's so much more out there, right? And it's not about being the best in terms of basketball, just to stick with that. It's about just continually getting better as long as you possibly can. And the only way you do that is to seek out those who are better than you. And so, getting out of your local bubble and playing these AAU teams from all over the country, all over the world or whatever. You're one of those AAU teams for me, right? That's what I meant more. It's like, sometimes I get complacent or, maybe I get a little puffy and I'm like, oh, I'm like one of the Seinfeld episodes. I'm a good person. Oh, the what do you call it? With the restaurant with Babu. I turn into Jerry a little bit. I'm like, oh, look at me, right? And then I'll bump into you. We'll have a conversation or whatever. And I'm just reminded that there's levels to it and that, yeah, maybe I am doing well enough in whatever it is, not to sell myself short, but there's room to be better, right? There's ways to be better. And so it's more just drawing inspiration from that. It's not me trying to be like you or trying to emulate anything. It's the game recognizing game and recognizing that, we push each other. And I would hope that through our conversations and interactions and stuff that, there's been points where, you gleaned something from me that benefited you in some way, because of all that. So.
Every time we spend time together, right? Even just watching the way that you interact with your kids and like, if I look at your social media, profile and the things you put up, right? You're not what I would consider an active poster, but when you do post stuff, it has meaning and it's almost always about your kids, right? It's almost always about their achievements and what they did, or it's a post about you, but it's gratitude for everyone else, right? Like the birthday thing with D-Wade that you did a couple of years ago, and like the incredible amount of gratitude that came through, right? And it's like, here's a guy who appreciates the people around him, right? And earns the things that they do for him, right? Tenfold. And shows that gratitude, and it's incredibly impactful. Like, gratitude's a muscle, right? And look, it's easy for us to convene those things and not necessarily say thank you all the time and really mean it, right? You mean it every time. And things like that force me to be like, hey, be sincere, right? And make sure that they know it's sincere, right? Like, I don't know, there's a lot of that stuff that, like, just hearing you talk about the way that, each of your kids goes through basketball and different sports and all the stuff they do. And you're just like, I just watch your posture changes, your mannerisms change, and you get kind of excitable. And I'm like, man, that is a level of engagement in parenting that is just infectious. So yeah, absolutely. I glean things from you on a regular basis.
No, I appreciate that. And it's something that I've learned probably since I was a kid, but something I've grown to appreciate more as we've gotten further into adulthood, especially in our 40s. But you know what? No, I take that back. To be honest, I actually, for the first time in my life, feel comfortable with who I am, feel comfortable with myself, and feel like I'm hitting my stride. And it's got me happier looking forward than at any other point, which is a whole separate thing. But in terms of, the posts and stuff, I appreciate the recognition there because I find that the people who speak the least sometimes get heard the most. I don't want to be someone that's constantly just sending chatter out into the universe because then it's meaningless, And I don't post for anybody other than me or for the people that it's directed to. So especially, like you said, the D-Wade thing, that was all Heather. I consider myself the luckiest guy to begin with for any number of reasons with her. But like the fact that she was willing to do that for me, knowing how much it would mean to me, and then again, sending Tim and I to meet the person he's named after, right? Like just so many instances that all comes from her. And that level of appreciation, it just fuels everything, and so I do appreciate having that recognition, and it's something that I know, again, from the way you speak about your wife, the way you speak about people in general it says a lot about your character and your perspective and whatnot. But I don't know, there's just something special about that, and I think we both appreciate the positions that we're in, the families that we have, and the women that gave them to us, really, is what it comes down to.
I mean, I think each of us found a partner, right? Someone that we say, hey, this is someone who I love, respect, adore, support, and I'm willing to give everything I can to that person, knowing full well that they can do the same in return. I will add in on something else, though. You haven't hit on it yet, but I'll call you out on it, and I love it. Out of all of our interactions, you know what I've never heard you say?
What's that?
A bad word about anyone else.
Ah.
I've heard you air frustrations about, again, people doing certain actions, right? Usually it's young people being ignorant and just, come on, what had to go wrong for that to happen, right? And you look more at the issue than the person. But I've never heard you badmouth a person. And that's something that I think younger me wasn't really good at, right? It was very easy, especially being the target of bullying as a kid, to kind of turn around and use that against someone else, and instead taking that and saying, I don't need someone else to lose for me to win. And if I don't have anything nice to say, I just don't acknowledge it, right? It just, let it go, because I don't want to harbor those feelings, because I don't want it, right? I will wish everyone else positive stuff, or I will highlight the good. I noticed it in you. I'm like, I've never heard you say anyone's name and be like, oh, and just roll your eyes, or I can't stand that person. It's never happened.
I wish I could say that it's never happened internally, but it is. it is calculated. And clearly, we've never driven together with me behind the wheel, because the that's where the Irish Catholic really starts to pop out there. But I appreciate that, and it's not. I can't say that it's something that's conscious or something that I engage in, with any sort of purpose. But it does come down to the complaining people, right? You mentioned them earlier. I don't ever want to be a victim of someone else or a circumstance, and I also don't want to ascribe blame to them, because nobody's perfect. And yeah, of course, there's things that happen that drive me absolutely nuts. But again, it tends to be more about the instance, the circumstance, or whatever, than the person themselves. And to be honest, there are people, who are net negatives for me, emotional vampires, whatever it is. I've learned to just cut those people out and move on, because getting angry over it, or wanting to change certain things, or having a negative reaction to it, it's not going to affect anything positive on my end of it. And that's really what I've tried to focus on more in my late 30s and now in my 40s, is just that positive.
But look at the power dynamic, right? So if you let someone, if you really don't like somebody, and you have to see them, and every time you see them you get upset, you are ceding your control of how you feel to that person. I don't know if young kids still say this, but right, you are letting that person live rent free in your head.
Right.
Right? Why? If you don't like the person, if you don't find value in that person, why the hell would you let that person have any influence over your happiness? That just doesn't make any sense.
Right. And that's something that, when the kids have had, problems with other kids in school or whatever, especially annoying classmates and whatnot, to wrap it up perfectly, it comes down to that communication and perception, right? It's perspective, rather. It's, look, there's a reason that this kid is doing this. There's a reason this kid is, asking you all these questions to be obnoxious or whatever. You can't control that. You can't control them. All you can control is your role in this, your reaction to the stimulus, the circumstance. And that's really, what it comes down to. And that applies to, interactions in school, life in general. You mentioned, first of all, happy anniversary, congratulations. Those are big milestone moments. I was just talking to Jackson today. So Heather and I are about to celebrate our 17th wedding anniversary on July 7th, right? And Jackson's mind was blown, because he asked how old we were when we met, and Heather was 17. So that means that we've now been married for as long as she was alive to that point when we first met. And that's something that takes a lot of work, but obviously the benefits, the rewards. I mean, I reap them every day. You know, I get to spend time with these kids, be in this house. Everything comes from her and from our work together. And I guess that was just sort of what I was curious with, like you and Michelle, is it is work. It's something that you both have to come to the table and continually, you know, put the effort into. And I love that you guys model that for the girls, because when they start having their own relationships and they have to get out on their own and do that, I think that you guys have set a really solid example for them in terms of what a successful marriage should be, a relationship. So
Yeah, and look, it's not by accident, right? I mean, and I'm not passing judgment on anybody's family structure or where they came from, but I think both of us had good examples beforehand, right? My parents have now been married for 46 years, 47 years. Michelle's parents, I think, are 44 or 45. Wow. Still married. And they had that gumption, right? That just like, well, this is the person I chose and we're going to make it work, right? And it's not always sunshine and rainbows and unicorns and butterflies. Sometimes it's downright frustrating, right? And sometimes somebody just has an attitude for a reason. And, living together for that long, you start to realize, I'm sure you can attest, right? You see the things that are coming. You see the triggers. You see like the microaggressions that start building, and you're like, okay, something's going on here. Like either we talk about it or I do something to help relieve pressure, right? And that's the determination when you have to try and learn your spouse and say, okay, what's the better way to go? Because sometimes they don't want to talk about it. Sometimes they're not even aware of what's bothering them, right? So just creating the pressure relief valve, whatever that is, doing something that's sweet or supportive or helpful or whatever, and they're like, oh, and then they switch to that gratitude mode, and it kind of pivots their energy off to the positive and fixes a problem before it ever comes. But that's just being mindful and aware of, conscientious of what's happening. I mean, the other thing I think that it's helpful, and it's funny because like I don't ask my wife for permission, but I do float things past her. Like, so, okay, even if I'm going to go play golf at 6 a.m., right? Hey, I'm at work, we're talking with somebody, I shoot her a text, hey, do you mind if, right? I'm not asking your permission, but I'm like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. I respect you enough to ask you if you mind, and here's what time I'll be home. After that, I'm all yours. Tell me what you want me to do and how can I be helpful, right? As opposed to, oh, I'm just going to go do this. And the guy just drops stuff on people. It's like, no, I have enough respect for you to be like, hey, let me know if you don't want me to do this and tell me why. And then, right, I still may come back and say, well, I really want to for this reason, or, oh, I understand what you're saying and we won't do that, right? But I think that's an important part of that. Learning how to communicate and interact with one another is setting expectations, communicating, hey, I respect you and here's how I'm showing it, not just saying the words, and then let's figure out what the right plan of action is going to be.
Right, and being flexible. There we go. I knew I had one more. I knew there was an F word on the bingo card. Flexibility.
That's the F word.
Yeah. So, Heather and I are a great example. We started dating in 2002, so 22 years together. 17 and 18 when we met the year before. We're not the same people now that we were then. Like, and in a lot of ways, not even at all. And, one of the challenges that we've had recently was, realizing we're at a different point in our lives, now in our 40s, just different shifts in just understanding and worldview and all of that. But also having kids that are now older, like Jackson's going to turn 10. He's the last single digit we have. It'll be 14, 12, and 10. In September, we're going to have a high schooler, a middle schooler, and upper elementary. And so for the first time, recently, like, we realized, holy shit, like the entire focus, more or less, for the last 14 years has been on mom and dad. We forgot who Matt and Heather were. We forgot how to be that couple. And that's not anybody's fault but our own. And so that's something that, we've put more of an emphasis on, which, we were discussing about going out to dinner and stuff. That's something that we would have never dreamed of doing 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and it's important, I think, to be flexible enough to engage in that evolution, to have those conversations, once it's realized. Nobody's perfect, right? You don't always understand the underlying things and whatnot, but having the ability to communicate and respecting each other enough to understand, motivations and just all of that. I think it's just a big package that it all, fits together.
No, I couldn't agree more. And the thing that's been interesting is we've kind of gotten back to date nights, right? So, again, we've been together for 20 years, right? We did the dating thing when we were 20, right? 20, 21. And again, same thing, different people. And especially in our situation, right? Some of the things that we've dealt with, we've become parents and caregivers and all that sort of stuff. And, sometimes it's nice to just decompress, right? And it's been awkward sometimes. And I think Michelle would tell you the same thing, is when we sit across from one another, it's just the two of us. And we're trying to hold down a conversation over a 2-hour meal. And there's always things to talk about, but it's so weird because we're so not used to just engaging one another. We're always, work or kids or other parent responsibilities and stuff like that. And like, we set a rule when we go out to just, what do we need to talk about? What do we do, right? And how do we enjoy time with one another? And the first 15 minutes are always you're like a little apprehensive. Like, it brings you back to dating when you first started because you're so not used to it. You're so out of practice that you have to kind of remember how to just enjoy time with the two of you again.
Right.
So knowing that we're going to get there soon, because again, we're 13 and 11. So, we're kind of right in the middle of, if you look, you got 14, 13, 12, 11, 10. So like our kids zigzag back and forth in ages. And at some point, like they need us less now than they did 5 years ago. Right.
And just to put an end note on it, we still need each other, meaning Heather and I and you and Michelle, and I think some of that, at least for us in our specific instance, some of that was lost, at least for me. Like, I gave too much of myself to the kids and didn't necessarily keep enough for us. So that's where we are now. And again, it's a journey. It's you course correct, you understand these things and you make the effort to fix it. That doesn't mean we don't have family time. Doesn't mean we don't have, nights out with the kids. But it is nice to reconnect on that level,
Yeah. I mean, what's been helpful for us, we started camping a few years ago. Michelle grew up doing it over the summertime with her parents, did it for years and years and years. We bought a pop-up, I think in 2018, rebuilt it over like a 2-week period, brought it up to the campground, used it. The kids loved it. So then we wound up ordering a smaller travel trailer. We went up there, and again, it was more just us and the kids had made some friends. Now we have a fifth wheel up there. We go up often. Michelle goes up with the kids for the entire summer. They have their friends, and then when I go up there, the kids are kind of self-sufficient now, right? So there's security up there. It's a gated community. There's all kinds of activities, and the kids have other friends that are seasonals up there, and transients that come through and they make friends with and all. So they're able to go out and do their stuff. And we now spend a lot of time together, right? We go on hikes together. We, go to the pool together. We invite other people over to sit by the fire and just talk about stuff and, listen to music. And it's like, we've gotten back to doing a lot more things together. And it's interesting because we're struggling a little bit with the kids really don't need us as much anymore.
Right.
So, right, when you've shifted your identity to be primarily a parent / caregiver, and now all of a sudden that's become who you are, and now it needs to be less of who you are. You have this existential crisis for yourself of well, who the hell am I?
Yeah.
Right. What does it mean to be me now? Because that's changing.
Right. And that's exactly where I find myself now. Like, for me, that was the primary, professional purpose that I had, and that's why for some people it was kind of hard to find people that could relate to it because they worked, they were involved at home or whatever, but they had a job. And when the fact that this was my job, I used writing as a shield for a long time because it was just easier to say, oh, I'm a writer, when people would say, when I had the babies, you're home a lot. What do you do? Because trying to explain that I was a stay-at-home parent, it was just the easier route to go. But now here I am. It's always been a dream. It's something that I've wanted to do. And we could talk about this another time. But the last step that I have before I make this dream come true is all that's standing in the way is a small elevator pitch for my query letter for the book, and it is the most excruciating writing experience that I've had, is trying to condense an 80,000 page novel into the paragraph or two that I'm going to use to sell myself, which we were talking about the professor experiences, and you sent me the thing that you saw on social media. But yeah, it's, listen, it's not easy to be a parent. It's not easy to be a spouse. It takes a lot of work. And for what it's worth, I mentioned, the Captain America thing before. You really are a living superhero in my book. And I'm sure even if your girls don't say it, and I'm guessing from your candor earlier, maybe they don't say it to you a lot, but I know that's what you are to them. You're a hub guy where everybody just sort of gravitates towards you, and it's not because you do it actively. It's not anything that I think you put out. I'm sure you would even do more and be like, not me or whatever, but you are somebody that I respect so much. And having you come on the podcast, I think I asked last year or something like that, or whatever it was because I couldn't wait to talk to you on this, because I always come away inspired. And I know anybody that is lucky enough to watch and listen to this is going to come away with a lot. And everybody at the college last night, I'm envious of them, because I know what they got in terms of the quality of the product. But dude, this was so great. I really appreciate you taking the time to come and come and hang out with me here.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me, man. This was cool. It made me really think about why I do what I do and what questions I had for you, and think about our relationship over the years and meeting at the kids' activities, and we've known each other now for, a long time. And it's thinking back through all the interactions and all the things we've shared with one another, because I knew okay, everything's fair game, right? So what have we talked about? What have we talked about recently? Probably 5 different times at middle road school where we stood out in the parking lot for an hour.
Right.
And I'm like, crap, I have to go get a conference call. And you drove me the 200 yards to my house because I was so late for a call. I had to run in and start it on the way back. But it's when you find like-minded people who are driven and motivated, it's magnetic. You're I want to spend time with this person. I want to hear what they have to say. I want to listen more than I talk. And I know today was more you asking me questions, but I think every time we talk, I'm I really am excited to hear the answers you have to say. So I think this is a great medium. I appreciate you having me on, and I look forward to the next time we have an impromptu hour-plus long discussion in a parking lot somewhere.
Or at the gym. I would prefer the parking lot, because then at least I would know that your workout was done. I always feel bad when, the AirPods come out, or the earbuds, and you're mid-set, and ugh. But it's just the dynamic, and it's true. We prop each other up. Like I said, I always come away from our interactions feeling really good about myself. And I think we should feel really good about ourselves, because funny enough, the one thing that didn't come up was really the one thing that sort of, unified us early on. It was beer. It's just for anybody who's watching, you're in phenomenal shape. And I know how hard you worked to get back into it, or really to improve upon what you were at. That's a whole separate thing, man. But kudos to you for, heading down that healthy path. And I know it's not easy to get there. It's not easy to maintain, but props for walking the walk and making it happen. So
yeah, I don't know. I do hard things, right? So I'm I could do that. And I think that's probably the phrase that's gotten me in the most trouble in my life, of just I could figure that out, right? So whether it's a house thing or a weight loss thing or whatever, I'm I just take big chances, try to do things that are sometimes maybe seem a little bit out there for people, but it's you know what? I believe in myself enough that I can accomplish it, and we're going to go for it. So yeah, losing 100 pounds in 7 months, it sounds crazy. Step 1 is have 100 pounds to lose. Step 2 is, write down your goals and how you're going to achieve it. And step 3 is just do the thing every day and be disciplined about it. And it's been a remarkable journey, using yourself as kind of a science experiment to a certain extent. But I tell you what, I learned a lot, and I think I learned a lot. The most I learned was days that I didn't want to do the stuff, but I knew I had to. And that argument with yourself of you said you were going to do this. You said you needed to be disciplined, and I get you don't want to do this, but you can't quit on yourself, right? And there's been, I don't want to open another door, But there has been experiences in my life where I maybe didn't make the right decision, right? Maybe I did stop doing something because it was difficult or something. And I'll tell you what, as awful as it felt when it happened, it's been one of the most dynamic change agents in my life. Is those moments where you didn't do the right thing, right? I'd love to tell everybody that I always do. There's a couple experiences that I quit on something or whatever, and that feeling, right, that consequence that I created has been a lot of times the driver behind why I refuse to quit again. So again, I wish I could say I do everything right. I think it's just a matter of I learned the hard way. Sometimes it takes me more than once to learn, but once I got it, I got it.
Dude, regret is one of the biggest driving influences that I have. It's something that I avoid like the plague. And there's a number of ways that I go about making sure that happens. And that's one of those things. I know there are days that I haven't wanted to be in the gym, or, I've wanted to skimp on something with food or whatever it is. And I think about it and I'm like, man, if I take the easy way out even this one time, the regret that I'm going to have is going to be so much worse than just doing the thing, getting it done with, and moving on with my day. So.
Because once you make a concession once, the second concession is easier.
Yep.
Right? And it's the whole Jim Rohn quote, right? We all have to choose our pain, right? You have to choose the pain of discipline or the pain of regret. The difference is the pain of discipline weighs ounces and regret weighs tons, right? And I read that and I was like, man, I wasn't ready to hear that, but it's 100% accurate. And I mean, I share, that's another one of those adages I share on a regular basis, because you have the opportunity. It's just whether you decide to actually do it or not. So.
And that's a wrap, because there's no way I'm topping that with anything else. Oh my God. Well, thanks again to father, husband, outdoorsman, and Mr. Belvedere superfan, Russ Sommers, for coming through. And thank you to everybody listening wherever and whenever you are.